Hi, this is Jason Baker, and welcome back to our lecture on serverless and Lambda functions. Well, I've talked enough about Lambda functions up until this point, so let's start actually working with a real Lambda function. I've logged into my AWS account, and I am now on the AWS Lambda dashboard. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new Lambda function. So I click on the create Lambda function. And when you create a Lambda function using the web console, you have a couple different options. You can choose to author a Lambda function from scratch. You can use a blueprint, which is a pre-configured template that provides a starting point for your Lambda function. Or you can use the AWS Serverless Application Repository, which is a a large global repository of Lambda functions provided by other people, but provided by AWS partners and other developers. For this hands-on demonstration, I'm going to start with a pre-configured template. So I click on the blueprints checkbox, and I'm looking for a basic hello world sort of template. Anytime you start working with a new application development framework, typically you start by creating a very simple hello world type application. So I'll type in hello in the filter, and I'm going to select this hello world Python 3. This is a starter AWS Lambda function which uses the Python 3.6 execution environment. So I'll select the Hello World Python 3 and then click on Configure. The next thing I need to do is name my function, and I'm just going to call it my Hello World function. And now we need to select an execution role for the function. Remember, every single function needs to have an execution role, and the execution role is what determines the resources that the Lambda function can access within AWS. Now, this Lambda function is super simple, and it's actually not going to connect to any other AWS resources. But despite that, I still need to give it some sort of role. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new role from a template, and I'm just going to call it my hello role. And I will select as a policy template. These are pre-existing policies that AWS has created for us. And I'm just going to select this simple microservices permission template for the policy. And I don't actually really know what that template provides. But again, for this particular function, this function isn't going to be, I'm not going to design it to access any external AWS resources. This is just a very simple uh, function that we're creating for educational and testing purposes. Okay, I'm going to scroll down then, and it shows me the Lambda function code. Here is my entire function. It's very simple. The function is importing the JSON module. It's going to print out to standard output the string loading function, and then we've defined a Lambda handler function. And again, this is going to be the handler for the Lambda function, which means that when the function is invoked, this is the method in the function which is going to be called first. And when that method is called, we're going to pass in an event object and a context object. The, the, the contents of the function are very simple. It's going to print out three different values, and these values are coming from attributes that are part of the event object, which is passed into the Lambda function. and then the function is going to return a value. So it's going to return the first value in this set up here, which is key one. Very, very simple Lambda function. If I keep scrolling down, then I can create the function. I'll go ahead and click on that, and it takes it takes 10, 20 seconds to create the function. And now my function has been created. And in the Lambda dashboard here, I can make some additional configuration changes to my function. If I scroll down, I can see the different triggers, the event sources that are available to trigger my function. We are going to trigger this function manually by sending a test event to the function. So I don't need to set up an event source. If I keep scrolling down, you can see that my function is set up with a Python 3.6 runtime environment. If I wanted to, I could switch it to any of these other runtime environments, but then, of course, I might need to change the actual function code from Python to Java or JavaScript or Go or whatever type of environment I've selected. Here's where I define the Lambda function handler. And one thing to note is that one thing that's pretty cool is that there's a text editor here, a code editor that I can use to modify my Lambda function code. And you see that my Lambda function code is actually stored within a file. And this file is called lambda underscore function.py. Python files, of course, typically end with the .py extension. And you can see my Lambda handler is pointing at the lambda underscore function file, and then the dot lambda underscore handler. And lambda underscore handler is the name of my handler function that's defined here in the code. If I keep scrolling down, you can see that I can set some other things like environment variables, which I'll talk about later in the lecture. I can specify tags, just like any other resource. I can tag my Lambda functions. You can see here I've got an execution role set up, a description for my Lambda function, and then this slider allows me to change the amount of memory that I'm allocating to my Lambda function. This is a very simple function, so I can keep it at its lowest amount of memory, which is 128 megs. I can also set the timeout value for the function, and I don't know if I've really talked about this much in the lecture. If you will recall, at the time of this lecture recording, the maximum amount of time a Lambda function can execute is 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, the Lambda function is terminated. But of course, we generally don't want our Lambda functions to be running for 5 minutes. That's very expensive. And so we try to set a timeout value on our function that's much lower. In this case, the default timeout value is 3 seconds. After 3 seconds, this Lambda function will be terminated, whether the function is done executing or not. We could increase that if we need the function to run for longer periods of time. And where the timeout value becomes really important is when you think about concurrency. If you set the timeout value really high and your Lambda function is taking a long time to execute for some reason, and there's significant demand for your Lambda function, you could end up with a situation where you have a significant number of Lambda functions running concurrently. And that can be somewhat problematic, especially if you have a Lambda function that's misbehaving, that a Lambda function that is not completing when you expect it to. It's caught in sort of a spin cycle, or it's waiting for waiting for some sort of request to return. If the timeout is set too high, you could consume all of your available Lambda function concurrency and end up in a situation where now your Lambda functions are being throttled, which is oftentimes going to impact your services and your customers. If this Lambda function were connected to a VPC network and was going to connect to VPC resources, we could define that here in the networking section. We could define concurrency levels for our Lambda function. And down here, um, right now it's set to an unreserved account concurrency of 1,000 concurrent Lambda function executions. Okay, so this all looks good. I didn't make any changes to the Lambda function, so I don't need to save anything. What I'd like to do now is actually test this Lambda function. And the way I test the Lambda function is by creating a test event. This is like basically simulating the invocation of the Lambda function. So we're going to try to simulate what will happen when this Lambda function is invoked. I go up to this drop down and I can select a test event. I don't have any current test events set up for this Lambda function, so I'm going to create a new test event. And when I create a new test event, I can create that event using some sort of template. And there's all kinds of different templates that are available to simulate different types of events that are being generated by various AWS services. In this case, I'm going to select the Hello World event template. And this Hello World event template sends this JSON object as the event. Remember, an event is nothing more than a JSON object that is being passed into the Lambda function. And if you recall, the Lambda function is trying to print out the values from three attributes in the event object, key 1, key 2, and key 3. And then it's going to return the key 1 value. Let's go ahead and change these values to something else. I'm going to just change them to sort of like random things, like blue, 2, and I'll change this one to circle. Just random values that I've set. And then I create this. Oh, I need to also name my event. So I'm just going to call it my test event. And then I can go ahead and create it. Now I've created a new test event, and I can trigger this test event by selecting it in the drop down and clicking on the test button. That will send the test event to my Lambda function. What is happening is AWS Lambda is actually creating a Lambda execution environment. It's passing this test event into it, and it's invoking my Lambda function. It's actually running it. And that execution succeeded. I can look at the details from this invocation, and it shows me that the Lambda function returned the value blue, which was the very first value of that key 1 attribute that was part of the event object. And then it shows me a log output as well. Remember, the Lambda function is printing out some of these details. If I go down to Lambda function, you can see that it's printing out value 1 equals the value of key 1 and so on. It's printing that to standard out within the Lambda execution environment. And so anything that's going to be ends up in standard out in the Lambda execution environment is also going to end up in the CloudWatch logs. And so you can see those three values ended up in our log file. I can click on the logs. If I follow this link over here, it's actually going to open up a CloudWatch log window, and it shows me the log stream for my Lambda function. If I click on that, here are the actual raw logs that were collected by CloudWatch. And again, you can see that the three values that were printed out to standard output are in my log file. going to go back to the Lambda function, and I'll close this detail box that popped up. I'm going to select the monitoring tab. If I select the monitoring tab, I can look at some CloudWatch metrics. There's really not much to see here. You see a little dot that represents the invocation of my Lambda function. And as you can see, there's only been one invocation of my Lambda function, and that Lambda function it executed in about 27 milliseconds, which is fairly quick. And so when I'm looking at metrics for a Lambda function, generally I'm really interested in the error rate. I'm looking to see if there's errors that are being generated. I'm also looking to see if my Lambda function is getting throttled because this can have a significant performance impact on my application. Let's go back to the configuration of the Lambda function and let's make a simple change. So we'll go down, we can do this right from the code editor. We'll go down into the Lambda function, and instead of returning key 1, let's return key 3. We'll go ahead and make that change and then we'll save it. And we'll go back up to our test event and we'll trigger the invocation of the Lambda again. And now the function's been triggered, and this time it returns circle. Remember the last time the function returned blue, but because we changed the function, it's going to return a different value. Very simple, very straightforward. This is really the most simple sort of Lambda function you could possibly create. And the reality is that we really never create functions that are this simple. But when you're working with Lambda for the first time, this is a very easy introduction because it's kind of showing you how the Lambda function is taking the event object in and how you can access the attributes in that event object and then return values. It's very common to create Lambda functions where you're, using the AWS API. If you're using Python, the AWS SDK model is called Boto3. So you'd import the Boto3 module, and then you have access to the full AWS API, and you can then use the Lambda function to do anything that the API allows you to do. Of course, if you're going to be accessing and manipulating AWS resources using a Lambda function, the Lambda function needs to have an execution role with a policy attached to it that allows you to access the resources that you need to access. So that's something to keep in mind. Well, I hope you enjoyed this very simple introduction to Lambda functions, and we'll continue on with the lecture.